sometimes I'm aware that I sound a little bit like a killjoy because I'm telling people to leave their phones behind a lot more. But it's really about being more intentional about, does this serve me right now and how I want to be in life, and does it not?
Welcome to the Healthy Screen Habits Podcast. I'm Hillary Wilkinson. Whether you're starting your parenting journey with a newborn or looking to connect with your teen on technology, let's learn some new healthy screen habits together. Johanna Renoth is the founder of Log Off Live More. Her work is about helping people navigate the digital world in a healthy, empowered way. She does this by teaching and sharing resources about digital well-being and helping entrepreneurs market themselves without relying on social media. So I think that kind of as teens and kids are sort of developing their digital skills, this concept of branding and self-branding sort of comes to the forefront. And Johanna, I'm really interested. You help entrepreneurs market themselves without relying on social media. Do you think there's kind of an overlap, or these same sort of skills can be taught to our teens?
I think to a certain extent. And there are some things that are transferable to kids, I think, and teens. I think primarily what I see also in my research, I did a PhD on Instagram and the consequences of tech for society and culture and just a bigger picture, is that personal branding is sort of twofold. It can be a great tool to really claim your place in the world, to show what you're about, to really, I think, create economic opportunities for yourself also, if you know how to do that well. And at the same time, the way we've been using it and the way we've been used to doing that on social media is really by exposing a lot, right? Trying to get attention. We're in the midst of the attention economy, and whoever has the ability to in any way garner attention online, that's really, in the way, it's a skill to have, even though, it's a bit of a treacherous thing to navigate. And at the same time, the question is also, well, at what cost does that attention come? And I think especially as younger teenagers and older teenagers are starting to navigate that world, they'll probably see a lot of creators on TikTok building a personal brand and leveraging that into companies, into income, which can be a good opportunity. But then also the question is, how do you, I think, protect kids and educate them around letting them know that not all of that is something they need to do, right? You don't need to share everything in your personal life just to build your brand, and to really be savvy as much as a young person can. I think it's also a matter of experience and maybe playing with that a little bit and figuring it out for yourself, but really to give them the savvy and the awareness from the get-go that they don't have to do everything they see online, and there are different ways to build a brand if that's what they're into, or if maybe they feel peer pressure or peer incentives around that.
Right. And I can see how it's this kind of perfect intersection of teens at their developmental stage of wanting to enforce peer relations, and it's the cool factor. And I can see also where it being the attention economy, like you've said, the posts that garner the most interaction are the ones that are the most outrageous typically, which can go completely off the rails. We want to support our kids in their exploration of social media, as you would say, but how do you suggest we rein in that impulse to create content that they're not going to have to go and clear off their feeds? I've noticed this very interesting trend where, as the parent of teenagers, as soon as they, become maybe entrepreneurial or start applying to colleges, their feeds get an immediate wipe And I
Mhm.
don't know whether kids are being coached to do that or whether it's something that they feel they want to. But I'm just wondering, how do you suggest we start kind of, I don't know, putting up the rails to help them not have to do that enormous wipe?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I mean, I want to be transparent here. I don't have teenagers, right? So everything I say also needs to stand the test of reality. But what I can suggest, and also what I've seen in conversations with young people, is really, so I think the worst thing you can do is really talk down on them and pretend they don't know, because they're so much more savvy. um, but just having an honest conversation with them about this, that this is something that's going on, and we're seeing a lot of people do that. Really, this idea of personal branding has become so ingrained in our culture now, in how people show up, for example, on LinkedIn, right? It's not just influencers, it's a lot of people, I think, feel that they have to, in some shape, way, or form, project a type of personal brand online. So I think it's good and helpful to make them aware that right now we don't have anything online that's like the right to be forgotten. So whatever you put out can be, in one way or another, you can find it, right? I mean, you have to have some level of savvy, and you need to know what you're doing, but still a lot of what we put out lives online forever. And until maybe the laws change or our sensibilities change, that we need boundaries around that. So what I think you can tell a teenager is to consider, if they would want that thing to live online for the rest of maybe their lives or something. I mean, that's a bit dramatic, but just to give them the sensibility around that, even though it does feel very playful and that it doesn't matter, it at the end of the day, it really does, because it connects to their name, it connects to maybe future opportunities. And of course, one weird post is not going to be the end of the world, but I can also see that that could be a source of anxiety, really, of trying to figure out, well, what can I do? What can I not do? What is going to generate backlash? How are people going to see me? And and to let them know that there still is room for experimentation, but to also help them and make them aware that experimentation means, I guess, coloring within certain lines that you help them set for themselves. And if you once or twice maybe miss the mark a little bit, that can be fixed, but that it really helps to be cognizant that even though a lot of social media feels very playful, it can have real world consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. So, Johanna, you're in Germany, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super familiar with the German education system, but in the US, growing up, I'm a Gen Xer, but growing up, there was always this overwhelming threat of this will go down on your permanent record. Okay. In school. And that always felt hugely daunting, as a kid. And I kind
Yeah.
of, as you were talking, I was like, I've never before thought about, like, we always talk about, it's almost like too big for kids to understand when we say, like, oh, it lives on forever. It's like, it's almost too big. But if it's, I was just thinking about that parallel of, like, explaining that this goes on your permanent record. So, I don't know. I'm just,
Yeah. Maybe
okay.
maybe it also helps to just, sometimes I think for all this digital and internet stuff, quote unquote, real world analogies can be really helpful. So you could also frame it around, well, what would you be comfortable putting up on a billboard? Something really personal, or a fight you're having with your friend, you wouldn't want that up on a billboard for the entire town to see. I mean, I'm thinking about Los Angeles and the interstates and the big billboards you have. And
Yeah.
with social media, from a technological point of view, the possibility is there. It doesn't mean that everybody is going to see what you put up online, but if you have a public profile, the possibility is there. And it really could be like, all these cars going past this billboard on the interstate. So it can help them sort of have that frame of mind. What would I be comfortable for people to see about my life up on a billboard like that? And if you feel uncertain, then maybe give it a day or two and see
Yeah.
if I want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I'm reflecting on a previous conversation I had with Richard Collada, and he brought up the point that we spend so much time telling kids what not to do online. We really, we need to flip that script a little bit. And so maybe talk about some things about like, oh, would you like to share this? Would you like to, when you do have the opportunity for a moment of, something that would be a great post, like maybe a, photograph of the pier at
Mhm.
sunset. I'm just thinking like, how do we
Yeah.
install training wheels? So
I love that idea because I think so much of our conversations right now around technology, social media, we've I think in the past years we've, especially with the pandemic and everything that came afterwards, when our life moved online so much, we've really become aware of the challenges, and it's important to talk about that. But I love what you just suggested, because it's not just about talking about what's not working, but really retraining ourselves to be intentional with it. And I think if you can instill in your kids and teenagers this idea of, okay, well, you want to share something with the world, let's figure out within maybe this framework or whatever boundaries you can collaboratively figure out, and show them, okay, well, we're in this situation now, or what do you want to share now? That also still helps you sort of protect your privacy, or protect you from maybe, let's say, challenges down the road in terms of
right.
what you were saying, it's going on your permanent record. Because fear, I think it's important to have a serious conversation about this, and at the same time, just going about this with fear as a driver is not a good idea, because it doesn't empower anyone, adults as well, in how to use this. It's more about finding what works for you and then keeping with that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So, you have written a very interesting PhD. Can you share the topic and maybe like, how do you like this? Can you take years of what you've been studying and distill it into, I don't know, we got like 2 minutes
1 minute.
before commercial break. Yeah, exactly. How's
Wonderful.
that for annoying?
No, it's great. I like it. So I'm a political scientist. I specialize in theory of democracy, which I think is so interesting right now. And I wanted to know what is political about Instagram, because for a long time, especially researchers and I think culture, looked at Instagram as something like, oh, it's frivolous. People are posting photos of their food and their dogs and their outfits. And I thought, well, actually, if millions, hundreds of millions of people are doing that, something is going on that has effects on how we interact with each other and how we deal with each other in politics as well. And what I found is that with social media, I mean, not just Instagram, but with social media and technology in general, the images are interesting because they tell us something about the culture that we live in. For example, this whole impetus around personal branding, and that a lot of people feel now they have to have a personal brand to matter. But at the same time, when you look at the bigger picture and the economic motives that are behind how these platforms work and how the platforms work, is really the key, I would say, the key challenge for democracy, because these platforms don't work in ways that you could consider democratic. And they have, at the same time, they control the communication streams of billions of people in the case of Meta. And that, in a nutshell, is where challenges really are created for democracy. And it's not just about misinformation, it's really even further upstream, where all, I would say, the conditions of how we interact on these platforms are fundamentally flawed, because we think, and I think this is also important for kids, we think that we're on there to share about our lives, right? To make funny content, to be popular, to be seen, to have all these cool things that can come with social media. But really, the underbelly of that is it's a business, and they want our data, they want us to see ads. And these two things are very much at odds with each other, especially when we need to be able to communicate with each other freely and well in a democracy.
Awesome. Yeah. So we have to take a quick break, like I said, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about that, getting into what you previously referred to as attention economy, which I think is a really important concept. And I'm hoping you can tell us more about your research.
Too often I pull out my phone, not because I have a specific purpose, but just because it's in my pocket. There's a new product to help change that. Built on the science of habit formation, the RO app and home device gamify the experience of being off your phone. The RO home device is beautiful, doubles as a charging station, and serves as a visual cue for you to put down your phone. Drop your phone in the RO home device, and the RO app automatically starts measuring the time you spend away from your phone. It will also show you data to improve your screen habits, send you reminders to take breaks from your phone, and allow you to connect and compete with your friends and family. Use the RO app and home device to put down your phone and to be fully present in your life. Visit goro.com, sign up for a yearly subscription, and get a month free with the promo code HSHabits.
My guest today is Johanna Renoth, the founder of Log Off Live More, an organization designed to help people create a healthy relationship with tech in their lives. Before the break, we were talking a little bit about your PhD and your research and the kind of intersection of the political climate and social media, and it's all very heady stuff, very interesting stuff. Was there anything that surprised you when you did this deep dive into Instagram specifically, I believe is what you were following?
It was on Instagram specifically to learn how technology and democracy interact with each other. There were, I think, two things. So first was, my PhD was a long-term project, and it sort of wove into my personal trajectory in my career. And the first thing I was very surprised by was how this entire field of venture capital works, and how investors think, how startup founders think. And I had a startup of my own a couple of years ago and was a fellow in venture capital. So I got trained on how to invest in startups by startup investors, which was hugely interesting. And it's a mindset that's very far away from what I'm used to sort of academically and also in small business entrepreneurship. And I was surprised, for example, that sort of the common sense idea that a business needs to make money to grow just does not apply for venture capital, because as long as you're adding users and you can fuel the growth process of a company with money that venture capitalists give you in exchange for shares of a company, that's kind of considered fine as long as you can figure out down the line how to make money, which is how we got into this toss-up with a lot of the social media companies in the first place, because they were growing and growing and growing and consuming lots of money. And at some point, an investor wants to see their money back. So even after they were publicly traded, it's still the same logic. At some point, people want to see money. And I think me 10 years prior, just as a very naive Instagram user, right, I would have never clocked that's a thing, that my activities on the platform or on the app were basically underwritten by just huge amounts of money being pumped into that with, in the beginning, no financial return, basically. I thought that was interesting, because the common sense idea of sort of doing business is really different from that, right?
Oh yeah, it's a whole new dimension, right?
Yeah.
In the business world. That's really, I feel like we could go off hardcore there, but I'm gonna have to swing it around to help you screen like that sounds really interesting, but I need to kind of
yeah. And I think the other thing is, I mentioned two things, and also to bring this back to what you were talking about, parenting and personal branding. I think up until I really dove deep in this research, and especially I've finished writing the PhD in a very intense 2 month, just sitting down every day all day, 7 days a week to finish the writing process. And the depth I had around understanding what's really going on was very cool. Especially, I don't think I was aware that personal branding, for example, is so deeply ingrained in our culture now. In the States, maybe a little bit more so, but also it's becoming more so in Europe, where if you're looking for a job, the employer also, depending on where you work, wants to see, well, what's your personal brand as an employee? And to me, that was a very surprising, I would say, development, because I had always thought, because I'd been in entrepreneurship for quite a while, that was something that's more contained to my field, because you kind of need it a little bit. But then the more I learned about it, the more I saw that it actually applies to quote unquote ordinary people, or young people, or people trying to get into college, or certain fraternities and sororities, or certain clubs, and all these things as well. And I hadn't, I'm glad you brought that up at the beginning of our interview, because I think it's one of the bigger changes in our society through social media.
And it also validates our teenagers' concern at their online presence. I'm not trying to sway anyone in their decisions of how you navigate social media within your own family, but I just, when you're talking about it coming from a personal branding lens, it becomes different, where it's like, okay. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And I, to be honest, I really feel for young people, because it's so challenging to distinguish between, well, and even as an adult, I feel that, am I talking to a person? Am I talking to a brand? What's going on here? Sometimes the roles are a bit mixed. You follow an influencer, you think, and it could be somebody with 50,000 followers. It doesn't have to be someone with millions. And you're really engaging with what they're putting out, and you think that's really cool, and you want to be in touch with them. But the social relationships are changing, and it can be really weird to navigate, especially I think at an age where you're trying to figure out how to deal with the world in all areas of your life, right?
Right.
And also, I especially feel for teenagers and very young people who are starting to navigate the world of work, because I feel like a little bit of the innocence of being young and figuring it all out is undermined by this pressure, I think, that some people might very well feel, and justifiably so, to build a personal brand, because I think they still get to be people first.
Right. So in keeping with that, being a person first, your organization is designed to help people create this healthy relationship, which includes the balance and intentionality you talked about with tech in their lives. It's got 3 elements. Can you kind of briefly go over them?
Yeah. So there are 3 parts. I think the one that's really underrated and very important is privacy and protecting your data. I don't think we need to talk about that way more, especially when we talk about young people. Then I really care about this whole productivity aspect. How do you deal with technology in a way so you can actually do the things you want to do in your professional life? And then the other one is just how to live a good life, right? With technology, not despite of it. And I think the latter part is really about, often you see so many people when they're hanging out amongst each other on their phone scrolling, and it's easy to judge. And I sometimes do.
That's very honest of you.
I have to be honest. Sometimes in my mind, I go, I can't believe it. But it's really about being aware of which functions you want out of your phone, and to be intentional about, I'm hanging out with my friends now, I'm hanging out with my family, I'm doing things that are meaningful. Do I really need my phone right now? And do I need to pull it out? And sometimes I'm aware that I sound a little bit like a killjoy, because I'm telling people to leave their phones behind a lot more. But it's really about being more intentional about, does this serve me right now and how I want to be in life? And does it not? And especially the work aspect, and it can be studying as well, it can be being in college, of constant distractions and interruptions, and what that does with our attention, and what it does with our ability to learn, with our ability to create and self-actualize, is, I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg of that, because it took a couple of years, I think, for these. By now, we're really habituated in our use of smartphones and social media, of digital tools, and we've practiced using them in a certain way. So it's become very natural for us to have that impulse to check our phones, to check our emails, to do certain things, because it's just a habit now. But the habit very often doesn't help us in doing the things we need to do. And it has to do with especially dopamine. I don't know if you've talked about dopamine on the podcast.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So anybody who just needs a little quick primer would be dopamine's a neurotransmitter within the brain that has to deal with pleasure pathways, and particularly the anticipatory set and reward. Yeah. That would be how I would, if you've got a better definition, please.
No, that was really great. And I think especially with dopamine, and I think this also is very important for young people who are growing up in the digital world, it's very hard. It's doable, but very uncomfortable to unlearn this as an adult, as I've come to experience. And I also see it in other people around me. When you get dopamine, for example, from sources where it's very easy to get. So for example, you might go on social media, you see a post that you like, and your brain says, yay, and you get dopamine. And so because dopamine is associated with motivation, it makes us log onto these apps more, because it's a very easy source to get that intensely positively feeling in our minds. Dopamine can also be associated with addiction, for example. So what happens when you're a young person or you're an adult and you have to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable or outside of your comfort zone, or you're just not feeling like it, which could be studying, it could be writing a report, it could be
doing the laundry for me regularly.
Doing the laundry. Or when the more dopamine we get from sources where it's very easy to have, like social media, the harder it is to do these other things that are already not that fun to do, because there's this huge mismatch of easy dopamine from something that has no effort to very little dopamine from something that's uncomfy to do. And the more you do that, the more you'll find resistance to doing the things you already don't want to do. So you're sort of increasing the hurdles every time you do that. And managing your dopamine and understanding how it works is when you can help your kids understand that in whatever is an appropriate way to explain it to them, that a lot of that is really a biological experience, and that you need to learn how to, or that learning how to moderate that biological experience is a huge skill that if you have that and if you understand that, will set them up for so much more success, is, I think, key. Because to be very honest, I had to, when I was young, up until I went to university, I had really good focus. And then that was around the time that Facebook got really big. Mm-hmm. And I could tell it's been, for me, it was about a decade of not really understanding what was going on, but noticing that, I used to love studying and learning. And then it got
reading reading books versus just magazines and scrolling and doing the quick hits.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I noticed, I used to really love this, and now it's gotten harder. And I didn't really quite understand why, because it was so foreign to me. And I think these past years, especially since the start of the pandemic, I've really been intentional about rolling that back. And it takes a while. You can reset your dopamine, and you can be intentional with it, and you will notice the difference. But wouldn't it be nice if today's kids don't have to go through that? I mean, I hope for them that they can learn from our lessons, basically.
I think that is amazing advice. And I too struggle. So I think but I agree with you when we can come, kind of saying, hey, this is really hard, and I have these problems. Do you feel that too? Yeah. I mean, I feel like with this whole concept of we're all sort of learning this together, it feels very Wild Westy, but in a way it's beautiful, and it can be a connecting point as well.
For sure.
Yeah. So when we come back, I can't wait to hear Johanna's healthy screen habit. On episode 4 of season 7, I introduced Janine Mouchoir from Janine Mouchoir Coaching. She helps make parenting teens and their tech easier. As a listener of the Healthy Screen Habits podcast, Janine wants to give you a free link to her masterclass, How to Talk So Your Teen Is Listening. Get your free link by going to healthyscreenhabits.org, click the podcast button, and scroll down to find episode 4 of season 7. That's Janine Mouchoir, and the title of that episode is Coaching and Connecting Parents and Teens. Scroll down through the show notes, you'll find your free link there. My guest today is Johanna Renoth, the founder of Log Off, Live More, and a certified systemic coach, which I think is a fascinating term. I'm not familiar with it. What is that?
It's a way of looking at coaching that sees people sort of integrated into the bigger systems around them. So a system could be family, it could be work, it could be university or school. And it looks at the individual sort of in the context of that as a foundation, because we are people and we have our own inner stuff going on, but then we also interact with others. We're embedded in bigger contexts, and that just it creates that type of connection. But the way I was trained is still has a lot of regular coaching tools as well.
So it sounds like almost like relational coaching, as far as like where you are in relationship to others,
to a certain extent, yeah.
Okay. Well, very interesting. I'm sure I could benefit from some systems analysis my own self. Okay, Johanna, on each episode of the Healthy Screen Habits podcast, I ask each guest for a healthy screen habit, which is a tip or takeaway that we can put into practice in our own homes. Do you have a healthy screen habit you can share with us?
Yeah, actually, it's so great that you just brought up the whole systemic thing, because I think what really helps is to build systems around yourself and to have very clear boundaries. What I've noticed for myself, and then also for people I work with and who I help, is that the more you have to rely on willpower alone, the harder it is, because at some point throughout the day, you're just not going to feel it, and you're going to do the thing you don't want to do, and then you're going to be mad at yourself that you did it. And sometimes that happens, right? It's life, but it helps to set yourself up in a way where what you're doing is really clear and how that works around you is really clear. So, for example, I have designated screen-free zones in my home, and that means I don't bring the phone into the bedroom and I don't bring it to the toilet. Right? It does not go there. And in the beginning, it takes, again, a little bit of time to ingrain the habit, but at some point, it's just gonna it feels weird to me now to have my phone in hand and think about and be in the bedroom. I'm like, this doesn't belong here. What does this do here? It's like a foreign object. And it really helps to have very clear boundaries like that, because once you start to negotiate with yourself, like, oh, just this one time, you make the process a lot harder for yourself, because then again, you have to rely on willpower. Willpower for some people, it depletes throughout the day. So, you set yourself up for success in a much better way when you're as clear as you can around yourself. And then the other thing is, especially if you're a curious person who loves to read online, and that is something that gets in your way, I also always highly recommend a blocking tool like Freedom. Maybe people who have been on the podcast have suggested this before. No. Freedom is really cool because you can block certain websites on it, certain URLs across
So
devices.
it's an app?
Is
Freedom an app?
It's an app. It's an app, and it's also a tool that you can use on your computer or on your browser. And so you could designate that between, 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., you can't access Facebook at all. And there's really, you can set a soft block where you can go around it, or you can set like a mega block where you would need to deinstall the app and do a bunch of things to access Facebook. So again, the hurdle is kind of too big almost, right, to do it. And at least it works. And it works for most people, I think. So with Freedom, you can just block certain sites during certain hours of the day, and it tremendously helps with focus, with productivity, because you could enter facebook.com, for example, in your browser, and it just shows you a blank screen, green screen with a butterfly on it that says you're free. Do what you need to do.
I love
so
it.
You don't even see the interface, which really helps. And I found, again, speaking from my experience, that especially when you're on the hunt for dopamine and you really want your dopamine hit because you're doing something you don't want to do right now, having a tool like Freedom is extremely helpful because the option doesn't exist. It's kind of like not having cookies at the house, right? You don't have cookies at the house, you can't eat them. You can't go to Facebook, you can't go to Twitter, you can't go to whatever your favorite site for dopamine or procrastination is. Well, you could go there, but nothing happens. And I find that's another one of these.
It's like going to the bakery, but it's closed.
Exactly. And that's another example of having systems around you and really clear boundaries, because even if you find yourself acting against your own best interests, there's nothing you can do, right? The bakery's closed. So, whatever.
Yeah.
And you can move on with your day. It also helps, I find, to leave a little time window every day where you have half an hour or something to goof off. And if you goof off and do certain things during that half hour, well, fine. But then it doesn't spread into the rest of your day.
As always, links to and a complete transcript of this conversation can be found in today's episode show notes. You can get there by going to healthyscreenhabits.org, click on the podcast button at the top of this page, and scroll down to find this episode. Johanna, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I'm definitely going to get some better systems in place around our own house.
Thanks so much for having me. It was wonderful to be able to share all this with you.
For more information, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at Healthy Screen Habits. Make sure to visit our website, healthyscreenhabits.org, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or via RSS, so you'll never miss an episode. It's free, it's fun, and you get a healthy new screen habit each week. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate you giving us a quick rating. It really does help other people find us and spread the word of healthy screen habits. Or if you'd simply like to tell a friend, we'd love that too. I so appreciate you spending your time with me this week, and I look forward to learning more healthy habits together.